Welcome to the GILPP podcast. My name is Trey. Today we're joined with Reverend Dr. Haroutian Selimian, who has led the Armenian Protestant community in Syria through 30 years of war and rebuilding. In this episode, we'll be exploring his recent essay in the GILPP Quarterly, which covers themes of presence, dignity, and hope, and also how faith-based leadership can bridge the gap between citizens and the state. Reverend Salim, welcome.
Thank you, Trey. I truly appreciate the opportunity to be part of this conversation. And I really consider it a meaningful space to reflect on these realities, which is still unfolding, not only in Syria, but the whole region, because still the situation is fragile and the context today is not very much readable. Thank you for this opportunity again.
It's an honor to have you on, and I'm sure myself and our listeners will benefit from your insight. Reverend, I want to start by talking about the theology of presence. Many leaders equate success with mobility or seeking safety to lead from comfort or convenience. That's kind of the goal of many leaders. You chose the opposite. You stayed in Aleppo during the height of the conflict. For our audience and for our policy leaders who might be listening, how did that theology of presence redefine your understanding of what it means to be a credible leader in a crisis?
Thank you for this very challenging question, Trey. And let me start by saying that during the years of war in Syria, and especially in Aleppo, when the situation was unstable and the insecurity was high and the daily life could change from one moment to the other, the natural instinct was to step back and to create distance and to stay safe, to lead from somewhere more stable. And honestly, that instinct is very understandable. But at a certain point, I found myself asking a different question, not only how to lead in such a situation, but from where to lead. And slowly, something became very clear to me. If leadership is lived too far from people's reality, I believe that it begins to lose its credibility. And because people are not only listening to what I say, we say, but they are also watching where we stand, what we do. And for me, staying right next to them was not a statement of strength, it was a matter of faithfulness. In my faith as a Christian and as a pastor, I believe that God has created us according to God's image. And also, God remained in the human suffering and entered into it. And that shaped my understanding of leadership. So, leadership to me is not exercised above the reality, it is lived within the reality. Now, staying didn't make things easier, of course, but it didn't remove the uncertainty as well. But something else began to happen. People could see that me is not leaving and staying wherever they are. And slowly and very quietly, trust begins to grow. And I came to understand this in times of crisis. Credibility doesn't begin with position or a strategy, it begins with presence, Trey.
Hmm. No, that's great. That's really good insight. I think, to borrow language from the Bible, there's something important about incarnational leadership, to be with the people, um to feel what they're feeling. It's you're one of us now, right? You can speak from a position of a moral authority because you've been there the whole time.
Yes.
Yeah, at GIOPP we talk about leading by influence. So it seems that the you physically staying with your community, it gives you a kind of a different kind of influence with the people. It gives you a seat at the table. Um, did that help out when you were negotiating, with government officials or international NGOs for the needs of your people? Did that credibility and that proximity change that relationship, that conversation?
Uh, Honestly speaking, from my context, influence is not something which one can gain automatically. It is something that forms over time by being with the people and staying physically present, which makes my influence in a real difference. When I spoke with government officials or the international organizations, I was not speaking from reports or second-hand information. I was speaking to them from what I was seeing every day with families, with schools, with institutions, and the struggles that on a daily basis I am living with my community, and what I can call this real situation. And that changes the conversation with the government and with the organizations because it is no longer abstract, it becomes concrete. At the same time, being present allowed relationships to grow locally, not only in formal meetings, but in ongoing contact and in shared challenges. And that builds trust. So the sit at the table and negotiate, discuss, share was not something that was given formally. It developed over time, Trey. So people began to recognize that what is being shared is consistent, it's grounded, it's reliable, and in a fragile context like ours, that is what gives influence its weight. Not position alone, but presence that has been lived over time.
That's incredible. You're really earning, the trust of the people. You've got that moral authority. Um, and it builds those relationships, and I imagine it also positively, informs your work, right?
Yes.
Helps you to, we would say, in development, kind of more accurately diagnose what's going on because you're not, from some report, you're not, from a distance, you're right there with them. Is this? Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, that makes sense because you are not giving a sermon on them. I mean, you're not preaching to them. You are living with them and you're sharing. And what you have mentioned, the incarnational theology, which was my prototype, in fact, because I always had it in my mind and in my life, like when Jesus became flesh and he dwelt with human nature among us. I mean, being with the people and sharing the humanity with all the other sufferings and the edges of humanity, that was my role model, and I followed that model.
No, it's incredible. Your religious beliefs, your theology affects the way you lead, and I would say positively. When I first got out of college, I was concerned about people in poverty, and I got this role. I was working at a facility that helped people in homelessness, and I would drive in from the suburbs, and I'd go and I'd work at this shelter with all these men, and I didn't know this. It wasn't kind of at the forefront of my mind, but it was
Mm,
there with me that they were a problem to solve.
yeah.
And I was gonna solve them just like I would any test or challenge, from academically from school. And I actually had a guy say to me,
Mm,
"You think you know me because you read a book about me. And the
mhm,
please tell me about my life." And it went straight to my soul. I mean, he was right. I mean, it was like a punch right to my soul. And so I moved in and I lived at the facility for about a year. And it was kind of that presence, that incarnational. It was like, I know you as a person,
yeah,
not just as like a topic to be to
yeah,
be, solved like from a distance or in a book or something like that. It
right,
became much more real. So a very similar kind of theology of presence.
yeah, yeah,
But so the relationship building was massive, and all along that line, you noted that when your churches became lifelines in
yeah,
this time of trouble, that they were open to everyone. It wasn't just Christians, but it was Muslims as well. From a policy perspective, how does that radical hospitality during a crisis? How does that lay the groundwork for kind of long-term social stability?
Yeah, actually, it was something which naturally came and developed, especially in moments of troubled times and crisis. People usually they do not ask, "Who are you?" They come to you by asking, "Is there a place for me here? Is there a space for my emotions, for my injuries?" And when the churches opened their doors, it was not planned as a strategy as some others usually they frame us like we are not discriminating because that is somehow the strategy of our institutionalized ministry, but it was simply the natural response to that question that usually people ask, is there a place for me here? And over time we began to notice something. When people come expecting distance, and instead they are received with openness, something begins to change. And especially in our schools, when we have mixed students from Christians and Muslims, and also the church is located in a totally Islamic neighborhood, always and every day we are encountering with many other people that they do not believe as we believe in Christianity. Not all at once. This doesn't come automatically and dramatically, but I can see it. They begin to feel at ease. They come to the church, they come to the school, and they begin to trust us. And that matters deeply, Trey. Because the stability doesn't begin with systems alone. It begins when people no longer see each other as a threat. See, here the reconciliation part and the dimension of our relationship and our ministries is all about. And sometimes that change starts when something very simple being received, be it a, a a box of food or a box of hygiene kit or a clothing or a scholarship allowance, anything when they receive, they feel like they belong to our family. And I believe this is our uh,
That's
core,
incredible.
core mission. Yes.
Mm. That's incredible. You're it's humanizing, right? So
It's
it's so easy, especially from a distance, kind of, along this theme, of proximity. It's so easy from a distance to otherize somebody, to categorize them, right? But when someone walks up, to your ministry or into your life, and you just see them as a person, that's
exactly.
that's incredible. Um,
Yeah, on the contrary, sometimes people do this as a job, and each beneficiary becomes a beneficiary number, and this dehumanizes the person. And also, it is very harmful for people, especially when they are injured and when they are in need and they are living in a despair. Yeah.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah, you want to humanize people. We're kind of talking about dignity,
Yeah.
seeing the person for who they are. And in the article that you wrote for the GILPP Quarterly, you talk about a success story where
Yeah.
you partnered with the Aleppo Health Department to run mobile clinics.
Yes.
Why why is that combination of state infrastructure and community trust that you've, spent so much time, building? Why is that combination of the state infrastructure and the community trust more effective at kind of preserving and promoting human dignity than perhaps, state infrastructure or something top down on its own?
Yeah, in any crisis, the first instinct usually is to respond quickly and rightly, and people need help, and they need it without delay. Over time, I began to see something deeper. It is not only about providing the help; it is about how the person is seen while receiving it. That is something which is very important for us as we are continuing with this ministry.
Yeah. No, I agree. The way in which you go about it is as critical as the thing you're trying to do, especially when it comes to interacting in people's lives, right? Like, if my only goal is the provision of these required needs, medical or whatnot.
Yes,
If that's my only goal, then it doesn't matter how I go about it. But I might find these kind of negative effects, ripple outwards as well, right? Like it could be dependency, it could be dehumanization.
exactly. Exactly. See, I mean, here our understanding of faith and also our theology plays a role. Uh, we believe and we also act upon that every single person carries the image of God. And that means that even in their most vulnerable condition, they are not simply a need to be addressed, and they are a person to be honored. And when help comes only from outside, even when it is generous, there is a quite risk. The person can begin to feel reduced to a case, to a number, as I said, and to someone who only receives. But when institutions and community workers together, something changes. The person is not anymore only the part that is expecting the help. They are still recognized as part of a living community.
Mhm.
So I believe dignity is very important to keep the dignity, and because dignity is not preserved by assistance alone, it is preserved when the person continues to feel that they belong, that they are seen, and that their life still carries value. In many ways, true care is not only about meeting needs, it is about protecting the person behind the need.
Incredible. Incredible. Yeah. I would wonder if you would, and tell me if you agree
Yeah.
that the presenting need, might be food or shelter or whatnot. But there's also a need behind it, like you said, taking care of the dignity of the person, their image of themselves, right? That image of God even inside of them, preserving, protecting that dignity. I would even say that is a need.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it is a need, and that is the human part of the person, which is behind the physical need. So I believe that there is the physical need, and there is the need which is unseen, which is it sits in the core of every single human being.
Right.
We should touch that core.
Beautiful. No, it's fantastic. Sometimes we forget to preserve and protect that need. Yeah, that's a great point, Reverend. We're kind of talking about that partnership between government and their institutions and their expertise and funding, with on the ground kind of local organizations like say a church. Um, you've advocated for faith groups to be included in official social recover frame. Let me start again. You've advocated for faith groups to be included in official social recovery frameworks, such
Mhm.
as your work with the UN ESCWA. How can, I mean, thinking kind of more operationally here, how can governments better utilize the grassroots connections of faith leaders, to ensure that policies actually reach the most vulnerable?
This is very important question. I believe that there is often a gap between how policies are designed and how life is actually lived.
Mm,
Faith communities are present very close to that reality. And not only, no, sorry, faith communities are present very close to that reality, not only in public settings, but in homes through our visitations,
mhm,
pastoral encounter with them, in personal struggles, in moments when people do not always speak openly about their uh, injuries, about
mhm,
their dignities, and this presence is not only practical, it is also pastoral. So I would like to underline the pastoral part of our ministry, because people do not only carry material needs, they carry fear, they carry within themselves uncertainty, and also for many families, they carry loss. And
mhm,
faith communities often encounter the whole person. So we have to look at the person holistically as a whole, not just the visible need of a single human being.
mhm,
So when governments engage faith actors, they are not only accessing a network, they are engaging a presence that already carries trust. And that trust allows policies to reach people in a way that is more human, more attentive, and more complete. If I would like to say a single sentence at the end of this section, I will say that in that sense only, faith communities do not replace systems. They help them become more responsive to the person, not only to the problem. So that is very important, not to be reactionist to a problem, but to be responsive to the needs as a whole.
Amazing. You can translate, you act as a bridge between kind of these macro level, priorities, funding, policies, programs, bridging it to, the family level, the community level, but not only taking it that direction, but also giving it life, giving it context and color, and reminding, perhaps, reminding these systems of the depth, of person and community and family. That's incredible partnership. You know,
I mean, maybe here we can say that contextualizing our ministry or decontextualizing. I mean, we should be in the context and look at the need of the person as a whole, which returns back their injured dignity, and also they feel more safe and they feel like they belong to a wider community, which there is peace and tranquility in that setting.
yeah, awesome. And you have experience with this. Your homeless shelter in Aleppo. It actually operates with partial state funding. Um, I'm thinking about, some leaders who might be listening to this, from other emerging economies. What are some key elements, that are necessary in that kind of public-private partnership, if you will, that but necessary in that partnership? Um, what are the key elements that are needed to run a partnership like that in an effective and healthy manner?
Yeah, yeah. Usually in difficult environments, we be careful that partnerships are not sustained by structure alone. Though structures are important, they are sustained by trust. I believe that
Mm,
trust, in many ways, is also a moral responsibility. From my experience, I would say three elements are essential. First, clarity, so that each side knows its role and no one carries confusion. So, clarity is important. Secondly, transparency, because without honesty, trust cannot remain, Trey. And thirdly, I would say shared responsibility, so that no one side dominates or withdraws. But beyond this, there is something deeper. Partnerships must be guided by a shared understanding that the person being served is not an object of assistance, but a life that carries dignity, as we talked about.
mm,
And when that is held at the center, the partnership itself becomes, I believe, more than functional, it becomes meaningful.
mhm. No, that's wonderful. The alignment of ethics and vision. There also has to be, I would imagine, respect. Respect for each. You mentioned clarity, respect for what you bring to the table. And what they're bringing to the table, and kind of, how to, you know, synergize and use these two, elements together. Do you find in your relationship with local government that there is that kind of respect, that understanding of, the special role that faith communities bring?
Well, in the beginning, it was not there, honestly, because we strived a lot to create that motion and also to build up that platform. But year after year, by doing, over time, we felt like they look at us as a trustworthy and they try to cooperate with us. And from there, we started uh, jointly functioning with the government and other organizations on a partnership level. So it's something which grows and develops by time.
Yeah, that consistency.
Essence, yes.
You know, you've spoken quite a bit about preserving dignity. We work in development and in GH&I, and we talk about dignity and participation, and not dependency, right?
Yes.
It can be collaboration, but we're not seeking to create dependency. In the middle of a conflict zone, in a crisis situation, the instinct, I can even say for myself as an outsider or as a Westerner or as a NGO, the instinct is often just to provide emergency relief. And sometimes that is the right, diagnosis, the right, thing to do. You need emergency relief sometimes in emergency situations. However, not all the time. At what point did you realize that traditional aid was at some point a risk to a community's dignity? And then, how do you pivot? How do you change to a more sustainable, solutions-oriented development model? Especially when, you've got institutional inertia, right? Like,
Mhm.
got people that are kind of bought in to that development. Like, how do you pivot? How do you make that change?
Yeah, very challenging question, Trey. I mean, something which every day we try to struggle with it. Let me say that one of the deepest effects of a prolonged crisis is not only material loss,
Mhm.
it is the narrowing of the future, especially for the young people. Usually, in our meetings with the youngsters, we feel like they see the future that is getting narrow. When uncertainty continues for many years, it's 15 years now. Life slowly becomes about getting through the day, not about building what comes next. And when that happens, something very important is at risk. Because from a faith perspective, a young person is not only someone who survives, they are someone who is called, someone whose life carries purpose. So the question becomes, how do we help them to see that again? And that is where education and formation become essential. Not only to give skills, but to resolve and their problems, to help them to resolve their problems and to restore their vision, to help them rediscover that they are not only living inside circumstances, but that they have the capacity to shape and reshape what lies ahead. And they should start believing on themselves, on their abilities. And this is not happening once in a minute. It happens gradually and through responsibility. It happens through trust and through being given a role. Sometimes even a small responsibility becomes a turning point in the life of a youngster
Mhm.
because it tells a young person, you matter and you are needed. You are needed
Right.
in the church, you are needed in the community, you are needed in the school and in the wider community. And when that begins to take root, they no longer see themselves only as survivors, but as participants in the future. This I have felt firsthand. This is my experience with the youngsters.
Wow, that's incredible. Sometimes, you know, organizations can dismiss youth in their potential to collaborate, to participate. They say, "Oh, you're too young." It sounds like y'all have kind of dismissed that thinking and said, you could play a role, you can play a part in this.
Yes. And sometimes we say, you don't understand. I mean, life is uh, holding back so much. Still, you are not in the perception level. So we have to make the youth in the pot in our lives. And also, they should start taking over. They should assume responsibilities. But from where that starts?
Right.
I believe from the point where they start believing in themselves,
Mhm.
in their skills, and they start developing their lifestyle so they can also be contained in the coming near future.
Amazing. Eh, I mean, 15 years of war, I could see how that would degrade, especially a young person who might not know any,
Mhm.
that
Mhm.
would degrade their sense of hope, you know?
Yeah.
that and which is so critical, especially for a young person, as they're imagining what their life is gonna look like in the future. Your programs, at the Armenian, Protestant, community, you've had, a century of experience, not you yourself, but the Armenian Protestant community has a century of experience, with schools and working with the marginalized. Speaking of youth and their, buy-in, right?
Mhm.
You have, some vocational and youth, leadership programs that can help kind of young Syrian people transition away from that kind of hopelessness, that kind of every day you just got to get by, that kind of survival mindset to engage citizens. It sounds like your program kind of builds that, slowly builds that. Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, actually, in difficult situations, large change often feels distant. And when everything around you feels uncertain, it is easy to believe that nothing you do will make a difference. I mean, that is a notion. But small actions can change that perception. When young people take part in something very simple and like restoring a park, and they see the result and something shifts within them, they begin to realize that my presence matters here. And that is not a small realization, because from that moment, they begin to reconnect with their surrounding, not as observers, but as contributors. So here there is the shift which should start taking place in their lives. And from a deeper perspective, this reflects something essential. Human beings are not created only to exist, but to cultivate, to build, and to care. Uh, when young people experience that, even in a small way, they begin to recover a sense of responsibility, and within that, a sense of hope.
Wow. Wow. That is powerful. Um, I love it. That's a very encouraging
Yeah.
word. Reverend, uh, one of the deepest wounds of the conflict is this kind of brain drain or this, people fleeing, but not returning, or this skilled professionals and the youth feeling like there's no future for me here.
Mm.
As the conflict, has changed, and hopefully, I mean, you can speak to this better than I can, is ended in Syria. As we look at a post-conflict landscape, um, what are some anchors? What are some things that can draw people back? Both, what can be anchors in the public policy world and community life? Some of these things you're talking about that have to be in place, for those returning to feel that they have a real, a viable, a dignified future to come home to.
Yeah, Trey, actually, this question is frequently asked question.
Mm,
Usually people ask me whether they are really need to be returned or not. I believe that return is a very sensitive and complex situation.
mm,
People do not return simply because they are invited. They return when they sense that life can be rebuilt in a meaningful way.
wow,
And that requires several elements. I will mention few. There must be stability. So without stability, people do not return back, because most of them, they have integrated their lifestyle, their cultural values with the countries and with places that they have already cultivated.
mhm,
Now, this daily life is not constantly disrupted. There must be opportunity for work. There must be opportunity for education, for growth. And there must be institutions that can be trusted so that people feel secure in their decisions. But beyond all of this, there is something deeper, I believe. A person must feel that their life has direction again.
mm,
Because from a faith perspective, life is not only about survival, it is about calling, it is about meaning,
mhm,
it is about being able to invest in the future. And when these elements begin to come together, return becomes more than a possibility. It becomes something a person can truly consider with home. So I believe this is the wider scope in which I can answer to your question about returning.
Well, it's powerful. It's powerful. Similar to the youth, in the country, that you have a role to play. You are valuable. You have
Absolutely.
skills and dreams, and we want you here. We need you here. Um, Reverend, you closed your essay with the Armenian saying, "God loves the hands that work more than the lips that pray." What is your primary call to action for policy leaders who want to move from words to work?
Yeah, I mean, that Armenian saying carries a deep reminder, honestly. Uh, Faith is not fulfilled in what we say alone, it takes form in what we are willing to do. So, not only by talking, but by doing. So, it's doing, giving an example, and showing the path. And the same is true for leadership. It is not defined only by vision or intention, but by what those intentions become in the lives of people. For those shaping policy and public life, this calls for a certain closeness to reality, not only asking, does this work, but also, who does this serve and how? And if I may put it simply, the call is this: to move from designing solutions to ensuring that those solutions actually restore dignity and can be lived by the people they are meant to serve. Because in the end, Trey, words may guide direction, but it is action that restores the dignity, that rebuilds the trust, and that allows people to move forward again. And when leadership reaches that point, it is no longer something we describe. It becomes something people experience in their lives firsthand. So this should be, I believe, the way how we perceive the leadership in our ministries, and also for those who are very much in charge of shaping policies and public life.
It's a great charge, Reverend. I imagine you would also encourage proximity. You would perhaps encourage those making public policy to be closer to the people. Is that something that you would?
Exactly. I mean, distance usually leaves you in a theoretical realm. Instead, you have to be inside of the scene, and you have to be touch based the needs, and in the same time to exemplify your life according to the values you are working and serving.
I think that's a great point to leave it on. Reverend Haroutian Selimian, thank you so much for your time and your insight and your example.
That's very humbling, Trey. I'm really grateful for this conversation. And these realities are not easy, of course. I'm sharing it, but they are very important. And it matters that we continue to reflect on them with care and with joint responsibility.
Agreed. Thank you for your time. To everyone listening, that was Reverend Dr. Haroutian Selimian on the vital importance of presence and leadership. Okay, so you can read his full essay at gipp.org. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.